Hi, it's Anne-Marie from Charmed Life Therapy back with another update on the Baldoni case because we've had Blake's response today to Bryan's explanation of why he shouldn't be sanctioned for speaking out on behalf of his client. So yeah, there's never a dull moment. Well, there kind of was over the weekend, but only in terms of hearing the same things over and over again, which is kind of the frustration with this case is that we're largely hearing the same arguments over and over again with just a bit of a fresher perspective on it. Even when it comes to James v. Tusker, it wasn't really a different argument. It was just the same thing being expanded on. So the danger is kind of that things lose impact, I guess, and general people that are very influential in this case lose interest a bit. For my part, if I had the money and the opportunity, I would definitely go to Las Vegas on Thursday and be there at 12:15 and support Perez. I imagine there'll be, if people go, which I suspect a lot of people will go, hopefully some people will travel for it. I think there'll be a really good atmosphere outside the court. It was really nice to see yesterday Andy from Popcorn Planet interviewing Perez, particularly since those two, along with Candace Owens, are now the main crux or focus, if you like, of the alleged content creators that are colluding with Baldoni. That they're the main crux now of Blake's argument. So I guess the focus is shifting to them now, although I very much believe Candace Owens will give it very little focus whatsoever, given what she's got going on. And I really don't think she finds Blake that compelling. I think she finds her cousin Baldoni, as she calls what does she call him? She calls him I don't know. She's got a nice term for him, but it's basically saying, the peace-loving cousin I have that's very different to me. I think she's more across the idea of not liking this variety of feminism, this girl boss thing, and what have you. I think that is a main grief with Blake as a person in her own right. I don't think she finds her that compelling to cover. So Las Vegas on Thursday is the place to be. And yeah, it was great to see yesterday. Given Andy from Popcorn Planet can be a bit of a volatile person and he has his own checkered past, it was nice to see like an open discussion with two adult human beings who have differing opinions and would have different ways of going about it. Just have a conversation where they listened to each other and took on board each other's perspective. And I think what kind of hit me here is you could almost say, and I mean this with no disrespect to Perez, but it's quite saying something when he comes across as the more reasonable human being in comparison to Blake and Ryan, because I was sat listening to that yesterday and, him saying about how he'd done his apologies for Brittany and just now at this point, he doesn't want to be stuck in that loop of continuously apologizing for past conduct. It's time to move on. He accepted full accountability and he's said over and over again that he's not the same person. And I think it was nice to see the sensitive side of him as well, because no matter what kind of character you are, it is quite a thing to be the subject of a legal court case. And especially when he's, decided to approach it himself with no legal backing behind him. So, you can have all the bravery in the world. It's still going to mean that you're taking a hit. But what kind of just struck me out of the whole conversation was I just cannot see a day when Blake and Ryan are having a similar kind of conversation with somebody else, a journalist, and saying similar things. I just don't see it coming. I said all along that if she should lose this, any kind of apology would be couched in that kind of language that Ryan uses, where it's just another opportunity to have a dig. There would be no genuine apology that was heartfelt. I can't ever see that coming. And that's just not me being like totally anti-Blake, totally this, that, and the other. Because I always try to approach it from this idea of that people can turn their lives around, people can change this perspective on things. But I just don't see that here. it's so entrenched that I just cannot see their perspective ever changing. So I guess this is why I kind of find it fascinating and frustrating to cover. And what else I was going to say today is I'm considering releasing onto the internet, onto YouTube, an audio version of one of my novels, one of my romantic novels. I've started recording it in chapter form, and I was thinking about uploading it to YouTube. So it's a British set romantic comedy, and it's book one in the series. So I was thinking about doing that if there was any interest at all. And obviously it would have a separate playlist. I wouldn't be mixing it up with this. But if it's of any interest to you, if you would like to hear my lovely dulcet tones reading a romance novel, drop me a comment and let me know. And I very well may do that. But let's go back to what's transpired today, and we will run through it and try to do it relatively quickly. It's not always easy, so let me share my screen. Okay, it's that one. Right, so here's the letter. So, reply in further support of Blake Lively's motion for sanctions against defendants' counsel. So this is from Ezra and Mike and Aaron and Matthew and Dunn Isaacson. I see Blake Lively seems to have another lawyer today that's asked to be able to be counsel, whatever the proper word is. I thought, how many lawyers does she need? And I think this is on the Baldoni side of things. I don't think it's the Perez side. I could be wrong there, but I'm sure there was another one popped up. So introduction, and you can see how many comments I've made for myself here. I was having a little angry post-breakfast cup of coffee and thinking, oh, just sick of this shit. The opposition filed by Mr. Freedman and the Wayfarer defendants does not seriously challenge that Mr. Freedman's repeated extrajudicial statements have targeted Ms. Lively's character, credibility and reputation. As such, those statements presumptively violate NY Rule 3.6 and are sanctionable under this court's February 3rd order. Leaving aside the opposition's repeated ad hominem attacks. So ad hominem, because as Perez was saying, we're all learning a lot of legal jargon in this one. Ad hominem means personally directed at a person rather than the person's position or stance in or on a situation. So it's like his personal insults, basically, as they're terming it. So, leaving aside the opposition's repeated ad hominem attacks, Mr. Freedman's and I was finding this when I was trying to record this audiobook, that there are certain words that I find really difficult that had to be done several times. Mr. Freedman's primary response is that his press campaign has not necessarily prejudiced the jury pool against Ms. Lively, but the consistency and volume of Mr. Freedman's themes challenging Ms. Lively's character and credibility have created a situation in which the issue is not whether jurors will remember Mr. Freedman's statements, but whether they can escape them. So most of these open comments, so my notes when I was reading this was, I would say, there's been far more consistency and volume of attacks on Bryan Freedman, multiple attacks from multiple angles. The Vin Diesel thing going on the docket, how many times have they asked for sanctions against him? How many times have they criticised him? They tried to make him now the author of this smear campaign. They've tried to get him removed from the deposition. She didn't want to sit for a deposition for him. He's been the target of more attacks almost than Justin Baldoni at this point, and more attacks to his credibility and validity as a lawyer as well. And, being accused of colluding with Perez, of orchestrating things. It's kind of a bit rich at this point, is all of this. So the issue is not whether jurors will remember Mr. Freedman's statements, but whether they can escape them. And it's like, oh, the drama of it all, can the jurors possibly escape them? The jurors without minds of their own will have been thoroughly bombarded, by this information. And as we said the other day when I had Joey on, so many people, and it really surprised me, just don't even know who Blake Lively is, and they certainly haven't heard of this. It'll be really easy to find people that just aren't spending a lot of time on YouTube as we people are listening to all of this. It won't be hard. The opposition's attempt to blame Mr. Freedman's misconduct on various press statements made on Ms. Lively's behalf, like his disingenuous rebranding of his proposal to hold Ms. Lively's deposition at Madison Square Garden as a scheduling statement, fall flat. These people do not get irony and a little bit of wit and humour. There just is no humour whatsoever on Blake's side of things. In sum, Mr. Freedman has plainly violated Rule 3.6. He has identified no cognizable justification for his violations, and accordingly, Ms. Lively respectfully requests that her motion be granted in its entirety. So the argument, Mr. Freedman violated 3.6 in this court's order. So in her opening brief, Ms. Lively established that Mr. Freedman has repeatedly and viciously attacked Ms. Lively's credibility, character, and reputation in violation of 3.6 in this court's February 3rd order. So I think that's pretty much what I said previously, who has sustained the most attacks. And I do believe that he's always done it with a bit of humour and a deadpan straight face. An actual restraint at this point is what I thought to myself this morning, given how the public is making their own statements to her credibility, character and reputation. He's saying things that are a lot less severe than the likes of me and you are, isn't he? You know what I mean? So go on, I'll go ahead. Mr. Freedman does not deny and therefore concedes. What have I said here? This is so much more annoying on this computer, but yep, deny because he's not a liar. Would you like him to deny? Basically is what I thought when I read this. So I'm going to have to open up each comment separately, I think, that I've made to myself. So Mr. Freedman does not deny and therefore concedes that he made each of the statements identified by Ms. Lively and that those statements targeted Ms. Lively's credibility, character and reputation. These statements reflect Mr. Freedman's efforts to publicly paint Ms. Lively as one, a liar who is afraid of the truth, and so lacking in credibility that she will look at a scene and say the sky is not blue, arrogant, a bully, and a privileged elite, deserving of the organic backlash against her self-concocted disaster, not the Wayfarer smear campaign documented in Discovery, not credible given her husband's SNL appearance. So let's look at the comments. I thought to myself, so this business of looking at the scene and saying the sky is not blue, what I've written to myself here is Ms. Lively has the film footage at this point, does she not? I assume she has located her SH proof, which, she was wanting, wasn't she, prior to the deposition, and the proof where she has a fig leaf over her private parts during the birthing scene, and the proof where Justin bit her lip, unscripted, and improvised kisses where she clearly indicated, what else have I put there? No, where she clearly indicated no, where she opened her mouth and said no, or pushed him off, or slapped him on the face, or did any number of things that were available to her, because if they were shocking and startling, there would have been some noticeable response, a person like she is, no wallflower and the rest of it, different kind of person to a lot of victims that are out there. Ms. Lively would not, if she's got the footage now, then she should have actual proof. She shouldn't be looking at the sky and having to say it's not blue and all the rest of it. So let's have a look at the other ones. Deserving of the organic backlash against her self-concocted disaster. So where is the lie here, basically? What is he saying here that is not true, basically, is what I thought. Not the Wayfarer smear campaign documented in Discovery, and not credible given her husband's SNL appearance. And what I thought here was, if she has been SH'd, then her husband's SNL bit was despicable, basically, in my opinion. Instead, Mr. Freedman argues that the chief failing in Ms. Lively's motion is the underlying assumption that any statement that touches on a party's character, credibility, or reputation automatically triggers a substantial likelihood of materially prejudicing an adjudicative proceeding in the matter, and therefore violates 3.6. But this hair-splitting exercise runs directly into the plain language of NY Rule 3.6b, which provides that a statement ordinarily is likely to prejudice materially an adjudicative proceeding if the statement relates to the character, credibility, reputation, or criminal record of a party, or the expected testimony of a party or witness. So ordinarily just means regularly, basically, I think is what I was thinking here. So ordinarily in legal terms just means regularly. So it's established that it can happen. So, or the expected testimony of a party or witness. What have I said here? I think we are seeing with Vatuska and Ferrer that wayfarer are unable to rely on anyone to support them, even when there is proof they treated them well. If anyone is at risk from the tampered witnesses, it is wayfarer. When you call into consideration, we have no clue really right now what Jenny Slate, Robin Lively, Colleen Hoover, Brendan Splanar, and probably many more. We really have no clue what these people are willing to say under oath at this point. So I think to say that these lot, wayfarers lot, Bryan Freedman, are going to unfairly prejudice a jury or witnesses with any kind of public statements that are being made is like way off base, in my opinion. So the New York State Bar Association Committee on Professional Ethics has further clarified that the conduct identified in NY Rule 3.6b1 is a presumptive violation of the rule. And then in like a paragraph there in the middle, centralized paragraph, the final and central element of the prohibition is that the lawyer knows or reasonably should know that the statement will have a substantial likelihood of materially prejudicing an adjudicative proceeding in the matter. The rule provides some guidance on this final element by identifying certain kinds of statements that are presumptively permissive and other kinds that are presumptively impermissible. I think there was a certain element of desperation early on with the Wayfarer parties because they were so far behind and they knew how unpredictable she could be and that nothing was off the table. I don't think Bryan Freedman has had any choice but to do some of these things in order to kind of just balance the scales, because I think originally the scales were weighted against Justin. So it'll be interesting to see how this one pans out. The judge has said that he's indicated really that he's not really interested in giving sanctions to anybody. He's told them off fairly severely so far, Wayfarer, and so far not sanctioned them. So we kind of just have to wait and see. And he has also said when they had those oral arguments in court or chambers or whatever it was, that he expects people to go out and make statements on behalf of their clients, as part of a defense strategy. So this is like the footnote now. The sole exception to this are statements made by Mr. Freedman's client, Megyn Kelly, and now disclaimed by Mr. Freedman during the podcast interview in which Ms. Kelly stated that Mr. Freedman is waging war against Blake Lively, who he believes is not a good person. I mean, that's not a horrendous insult as insults go, is it really? And referred to Ms. Lively as a bitch. See up at 10, number 3. Mr. Freedman argues that Rule 3.6 applies to statements by counsel, ignoring his own statements made during the same podcast that not only endorse Ms. Kelly's invective, but violate Rule 3.6 on their own terms, all while demonstrating why many of the statements made on Ms. Lively's behalf have nothing to do with Rule 3.6. So again, it's still blurring the lines there to the fact that he never called Blake Lively a bitch, and he also never called her a narcissist. He said he wasn't an expert. He was very careful there. He did watch his words. If you watch that interview, he wasn't going like full vitriol like Megyn Kelly was. So we pick it up here. So I hate footnotes because they ruin the flow to me. So the New York Bar has further clarified that the conduct identified in NY Rule 3.6 is a presumptive violation of the rule. And then it goes on to state NY State 977. That holds true here. A sustained public relations campaign attacking the character and credibility of a sexual H plaintiff creates an unacceptable risk of tainting the jury pool, particularly given Mr. Freedman's admission that in these kinds of cases, once someone says something, it becomes fact. Mr. Freedman offers no reason to discard the rule's ordinary presumption here. So let's look at my little thoughts that came up over this business of a sustained public relations campaign attacking the victim of SH. Let's look what I said. We went through this response to the sanctions motion, and there were far more times Team Lively came for Baldoni and attacked his character, basically. I'm sure I put them through somewhere. It must be on the next comment. So once someone says something, so let's look what I've said here. And what about all the things Blake's side has said about Justin that to some have become fact already? He is an abuser, a predator, a harasser, a misogynist, a liar, a hypocrite, a bullying method actor who terrorized a set, forcing Blake to do everything in order to get it done, a maniacal mastermind of an untraceable smear campaign, a man who invites his friends to come and watch you naked and vulnerable. Is it any wonder Freedman has had to make some damage control statements? When you look at it like that, of all the things that Justin has been accused of and how they've used his own language in so many of the crucial filings and used those things to call himself as he's one thing on the surface is a completely different thing behind the scenes. It's kind of a bit rich, them accusing Bryan Freedman of sustaining a public relations campaign against Blake Lively, really. So Mr. Freedman's statements are substantially likely to materially prejudice these proceedings. Presumption aside, under any analysis, Mr. Freedman's statements attacking Ms. Lively's character, credibility and reputation have a substantial likelihood of prejudicing Ms. Lively at trial. For months, Mr. Freedman has sowed into the minds of the potential jury pool that Ms. Lively is a privileged elite. She can't deny this. She is a privileged elite, intentionally twisting and curating the law to weasel her way out of a self-concocted disaster that she couldn't handle, perhaps because of a narcissistic quality. So let's look at my comments. So when it talks about twisting and curating the law, and this is just off the top of my head, we know that she forum shopped. We know that she did the CRD because he wouldn't be able to raise a countersuit against her because it would be termed retaliation. There's the Van Zan ongoing smear campaign, more docs needed all of the time, changing the very context of a scene that we can see with our very own eyes, the dance montage scene. When it comes to narcissistic, what have I said here? Yeah, it's like hands up these days. Who hasn't been accused of being a narcissist? I'm sure I've been accused of being a narcissist by somebody or other somewhere. It's like a term that's bandied around, she can't hack it. She can't hack that she's been termed a narcissist, but she's in the public eye. She's got to take some of these things on the chin. So such comments clearly prejudice the due administration of justice and potentially interfere with a fair trial by publicly tarnishing the credibility of Ms. Lively. And what have I said here? There was nothing Bryan Freedman did to make Blake look worse to the public. He only pointed out what we were already saying for ourselves, and he did it with a bit of humour that actually reassured those with real concerns about a miscarriage of justice and the very real feelings of true survivors. That's my personal opinion on that. Mr. Freedman's argument that there is no prejudice lacks credibility. This is not a matter involving a single isolated or discrete statement. Rather, Mr. Freedman has made repeated statements across months, which are then repeatedly recirculated by outlets reaching millions of audience members in a litigation that has been dominating headlines and drawing attention at every step. This belies his efforts to downplay the significance and prejudice of his statements, especially in light of his ongoing media efforts, which include not just a website that he and his team established, but also sustained engagement with tabloid and social media platforms. So these repeated statements across months, they pointed out 10. And if you look at them, most of them are in clumps of 2 to 3 within next day to each other. So kind of like a statement, and backup comment, if you like, or a statement and a clarification almost. It's not prolonged or sustained. We're talking about 10 in what, 9 months now. So if you factor in that most times it's been 2 or 3 together in the same number of days, you can't really say that it's an ongoing smear campaign, for want of a better word. And what I've put there as well is, I don't know about you, but I could have done with having a lot more to cheer me up. That was my thinking on it. So sustained engagement with tabloid and social media platforms whose conduct he praises and expressly encourages. Simply put, the issue is not whether jurors will remember Mr. Freedman's statements, but whether they can escape them. They do tend to repeat themselves a lot. That's the same thing again. This case stands in stark contrast with Sherrod, Teed, Vanderhagen and Ware versus VNA and the other authorities on which Mr. Freedman relies there. After a mistrial, the plaintiff's attorney made several comments to a reporter, most of which were made on a single day, including that they were only 1 juror shy from winning the case and were fired up for the next trial. The defendant sought sanctions under Rule 3.6 of Michigan's Rules of Professional Conduct. In denying the motion, the court found it nonsensical that these statements, which were akin to a reporting of the litigation, could possibly manipulate or influence a jury. I don't know how they can argue that when literally the comment was that they were 1 juror shy of winning. I mean, if they're talking about there's going to be a retrial, that you'd think that would remain in people's minds, wouldn't you? You know, I don't think that's a great argument there. At best, the statements at issue amounted to puffery about the likelihood of success in a subsequent trial and had nothing to do with the character or credibility of the parties. I think it implies that they were guilty, doesn't it? You know what I mean? The other cases cited by Mr. Freedman are equally inapposite. And then there's another one quoted, which was a 73-year-old case considering whether a criminal defendant was deprived of due process. And another one, which was addressing abbreviated general comments. Another one, counsel is discouraged from commenting on the character or reputation of the parties or the expected testimony of a party or witness. So there's a big old footnote here. So it was Mr. Freedman who on a podcast appearance with former client Billy Bush, again insinuating that he's at fault, it's all orchestrated, he's got this band of lackeys that put out his message for him, that aren't journalists or real journalists, you know, argued that it is these TikTokers and people on YouTube, they're amazing, they're brilliant, those types of people that have that type of information, that are willing to do that type of diligence, should actually be the jury one day. So he's not saying they are going to be the jury one day. He's saying they should actually be the jury one day in an ideal world kind of way, isn't it? It has since been revealed through a discovery that the Wayfair parties are colluding with several content creators, including Perez Hilton, Candace Owens, and Andy Signor of Popcorn Planet, to perpetuate some of the most hateful and anti-lively rhetoric. I don't think it's being done. I know, like, people are saying like some wild things. You could say Perez's name and that. It's like, but she does not get humor. She's so sensitive that she can't even sort of have a bit of a giggle about it. I mean, you've got to admit, if you had a sense of humor, even if this was you, it is quite funny the things he's come up with. There'd be a part of you that would have to admit it was quite clever, but I don't think Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds have that ability to see that. They're choosing to see it as hateful. So then it quotes in re subpoena to Mario Lavandera Jr., Popcorn Planet, Blake Lively, blah blah blah. So then it's quoting some case law there. News outlets regularly utilize social media platforms to connect to a wider audience, both within and outside the traditional geographic broadcast television limits. So People magazine, where a number of Mr. Freedman's statements were published alone, has an estimated readership of over 98 million people across all platforms. 50 popular US magazines of 2024 magazine. So that's where those figures were quoted from. The video of Mr. Freedman's full-length interview with Megyn Kelly on June 11th has over 352,000 views on YouTube. see Justin Baldoni's lawyer says he won't settle with Blake Lively, and what's next? And then there's another YouTube quoted there. But the thing is, all they have to do is ask for jurors that haven't watched any of this on YouTube, basically, and that would wipe out a great, ask people to sign a declaration or something, or an affidavit that they haven't followed this case on YouTube or TikTok or whatever it is, which is standard procedure, isn't it? They query people quite thoroughly as to what knowledge they have of the case before they take him on board. Honest to God. Anyway, I can't even remember why I highlighted this particular bit. Counsel is discouraged from commenting on the character or reputation of the parties or the expected testimony of the party or witness. But I don't think you can say that their side isn't doing the same thing. So then it's some case law quoted there. Statements included general information regarding asbestos claims in the course of litigation, and more case law cited there, addressing 2 Facebook posts that were not easily accessible. So I guess it's saying that some of the other things that were quoted were not so easily readable or readily available, is what I'm trying to say to the public. Mr. Freedman also does not meaningfully explain how the fast approaching March 26th trial is far enough in the future to warrant his no harm, no foul approach. Even if the mere 7 months to trial was sufficiently attenuated in an ordinary case, it is not, in brackets, cases that are widely publicised or sensational are those that are most likely to be recognised by courts as prejudicial to a jury. Don't know why I've highlighted that either. As noted, if there is any case that falls into that category, it is this one, and there's case law cited there. In brackets, it reads, the reality of modern media and the internet, however, means that the potential exposure to extrajudicial statements is not limited when statements remain on the internet, regardless of when a trial is scheduled. But that could, that goes equally, doesn't it, as I've already said, about the stuff that is out there now on the internet about Justin that is more harmful, I think, because it's more than just people's opinion of her personality, if you like, or her wardrobe choices or whatever it is. Some of the things that have been levied against Justin and continue to be levied against him are far more harmful and hurtful, way above and beyond, I think. So Mr. Freedman's only remaining argument as to prejudice is that it is nonsensical that an impartial jury cannot be seated up at 14. But that proves too much. If that argument were sufficient, there would be no need for Rule 3.6, and Mr. Freedman would never have stipulated to the application of Rule 3.6 as a rule for this case. Instead, as the United States Supreme Court has noted, even if a fair trial can ultimately be ensured through voir dire, I think you say, change of venue or some other device, these measures entail serious costs to the system, and the state has a substantial interest in preventing lawyers from imposing such costs. So I just wanted to clarify, I can't say it, voir dire. In a court of law, voir dire, or something that sounds like that, refers to 2 distinct processes: the questioning of potential jurors to assess their impartiality and suitability for a case, and a trial within a trial to determine the admissibility of evidence or the competence of a witness. The phrase is French and literally means to speak the truth. So the next thing, let's get rid of that for a second. So state has a substantial interest in preventing lawyers from imposing such costs. Right. So no safe harbour applies to Mr. Freedman's statements. While Mr. Freedman is correct that attorneys are not prohibited from speaking to the press, particularly in high-profile cases, such interactions with the press must be conducted within the confines of an attorney's professional ethical obligations. Thus, while a lawyer may make a statement that a reasonable lawyer would believe is required to protect a client from the substantial prejudicial effect of recent publicity, not initiated by the lawyer or the lawyer's client, a statement made pursuant to this paragraph shall be limited to such information as is necessary to mitigate the recent adverse publicity, And I think most of us would probably say that, as I said earlier, that most of Bryan's statements were to mitigate adverse publicity, recent or otherwise. So 7, likely statements about the claim, offence or defence. Information contained in a public record and the scheduling or result of any step in the litigation are permissible when made without elaboration, NY Rule 3.6c. None of these exceptions applies. Mr. Freedman's violative statements were not exempted by Rule 3.6d. Mr. Freedman attempts but fails to distract from his own violative statements by blaming Ms. Lively's counsel or others who speak on Ms. Lively's behalf, and summarily concluding that if Mr. Freedman's statements are sanctionable, so are those of Lively's counsel. Even a cursory glance at the statements raised by Freedman reveals the difference between his statements that violate Rule 3.6 and those on behalf of Ms. Lively which do not. First, Mr. Freedman identifies numerous statements made by a non-lawyer spokesperson for Ms. Lively and baselessly asserts without any evidence or authority that these were in fact statements made by lawyers euphemistically called spokespersons. I mean, Blake is accusing Bryan Freedman of being a PR representative. She's trying to force him into that box, isn't she, as part of her arguments? So opposition at 15, see also Exhibit A, which is this chart they've come up with of the things that they've said. And we can have a brief look at that in a minute. They've kind of answered Freedman's points about what they've said about Baldoni's side of things. Mr. Freedman ignores the straightforward principle that NY Rule 3.6 governs the conduct of lawyers and clients, governs the conduct of lawyers, not clients or their public relations advisors. That is why Ms. Lively has not moved for relief under Rule 3.6 for any of the countless derogatory public statements made by the Wayfarer defendants, their public relations professionals, or the content creators with whom the Wayfarer defendants have admittedly coordinated. So she's basically saying, you all out there got very, very lucky that we didn't do more to you. There's a footnote there above. Attached here too as Exhibit A is a demonstrative chart setting forth the statements by Ms. Lively's counsel, spokesperson or representative listed in Mr. Freedman's opposition for ease of reference. Only statements number 11 to 16 are by attorneys and post dating February 3rd, 2025. And in brackets, as compared to all of the Freedman statements that are the subject of this motion and reply. So we'll have a little look at that in a minute, just for comparison. So the distinction is not theoretical, as the United States Supreme Court has explained. It is because lawyers have special access to information through discovery and client communications. Their extrajudicial statements pose a threat to fairness of a pending proceeding, since lawyers' statements are likely to be received as especially authoritative. Mr. Freedman's attempt to justify his own misconduct by pointing to statements made by non-lawyers is futile. Second, none of the statements Mr. Freedman identifies violate NY Rule 3.6. Many of the statements do not even mention Mr. Baldoni or the Wayfarer parties. But as I said to myself, I think we know who they are referring to, do we not? Yeah, I think there's the hypnotic language slipping into my comments and things because I'm doing like course study at the moment, and I can see this business of do we not, because that reinforces it to you. So that's hypnotic language slipping into my comments without me realizing. But I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, that so much weight is given to that anything that comes from a lawyer who is clearly speaking to his client who has their own perspective on the case. If a lawyer says something, inflammatory or not, that there's a certain authority to that. But we've given women an awful lot of authority through 47.1 and the rest of it, this idea of they can say whatever they like and it's backed up by the law, and a man cannot defend himself against it without it being called defamation or retaliation. I think that is, if you want to compare authorities or what is taken more seriously, I think you would probably in these times, in these days, say that the female perspective of being able to say I was SH'd, I was SA'd, and the guy has no comeback against it. I think that's far more authoritative and definite than something a lawyer might say on your behalf. That's my perspective on it anyway. So see Exhibit A, statement numbers 1, 4, 11, 12, 14, 15. While the vast majority of where Baldoni and Wayfarer defendants are not mentioned, basically within whatever they were spouting off about, Ezra and team, while the vast majority of remaining statements are presumptively permissible comments regarding the claims, offences and defences in the action that refrain from attacking the credibility, character or reputation of Mr Baldoni or the Wayfarer defendants, see Exhibit A, statement numbers 2, explaining defence to retaliatory lawsuit. Let's just quickly have a look at 2 on the chart. Put it somewhere. I think that was that's the more inflammatory one. So that is 2 there. So they claim it only discusses claims, offences, defences, no attack on credibility, character or reputation. But Deadline quoted Lively's counsel as saying, this latest lawsuit from Justin Baldoni, Wayfarer Studios and its associates is another chapter in the abuser playbook. This is an age-old story. A woman speaks up with concrete evidence of sexual harassment, concrete evidence, and retaliation, and the abuser attempts to turn the tables on the victim. This is what experts call Darbo. How many times has Darbo been levied against Justin Baldoni? That this idea that if you speak up in defense of yourself, then you are reversing, you are making trying to turn the victim into the offender. You're not defending yourself. So this is what they bring up there. That's what they mean when they say number 2, that they were just only discussing claims, offences, defences, no attack on credibility, character, reputation. The evidence will also show that Sony asked Ms. Lively to oversee Sony's cut of the film, which they then selected for distribution and was a resounding success. And what we're seeing now, what we're getting more and more now, this perspective of, which we kind of overlooked earlier in light of the SH things, and the focus was there. But what we're kind of getting more a handle on now is how much she was actually saying that Justin's behaviour on set, she was spreading this narrative that Justin's behaviour on set was objectionable. So not just SH, that he was on set as this method actor that was so focused on the male perspective, and he wanted this whole movie about the DV male's perspective on this movie, that he was making it incredibly difficult for people, that he was directing love scenes that he had no business directing because of his ideas about what it was, and that he wasn't listening to any woman on that set about it, even though we have Isabella that was clearly saying that she had an awful lot of support when it came to love scenes, and she had an intimacy coordinator and it was carefully done and all the rest of it. Blake was busy creating this narrative that he was this tyrannical method actor, and she was also at the same time saying that he was lazy, in other words, and saying that she had to step in order to do the things that she did, otherwise they wouldn't have got it done. And if that's what she was saying to Sony, then that is possibly why Sony went with her cut of it. That's possibly why Sony gave her so much leeway. Could be, in my opinion. But there's people saying a lot of things about Sony too, and we know that, Ryan has a lot of sway with Sony, but we really don't know what was being said to these people. But I think it is coming up more and more now, how much she was tainting the cast as much as possible with this idea of it being some kind of tyrant. So not just a deviant, being a tyrant as well. So let's see if I've managed not to lose where I was. So 3, describing complained of offences in video footage released by Wayfarer defendants. So that was the 3 one. Let's quickly look at 3. So this was statement released to Deadline. Ms. Lively's counsel stated, any woman who has been inappropriately touched in the workplace will recognise Ms. Lively's discomfort. Anybody will recognise anything that you steer them to and point things out, whether it's there or not. we have this herd mentality thing. You know, people will, many people will often be willing to see what is pointed out to them, especially if they've been a victim of something and they have a particular sensitivity to something. It's like if somebody had a spider phobia and you showed them a photo where there were no spiders in it, but asked them to point out every spider that they could see, they would see it in every shadow or every kind of blur in the picture or whatever it is. They would see what you told them to see because they had a fear of it and they would go looking for it. So they will recognize their attempts at levity to try to deflect the unwanted touching. No woman should have to take defensive measures to avoid being touched by their employer without their consent. So they're describing what she did as defensive measures. While they are focused on misleading media narratives, we are focused on the legal process. We are continuing our efforts to require Mr. Baldoni and his associates to answer in court under oath rather than through manufactured media stunts. So you tell me, is that not accusatory? Isn't it? Is it not defamatory? Is it, they're saying there's no attack on credibility, character, reputation, only discusses claims, offences, defences in response to releasing video footage into public domain. Well, she should have no worry about it going into public domain if it truly showed what she said it showed. So what else we got? So 5, describing complained of retaliation offences. 8, defence to investigation claim. 13, explaining defences of applicable privileges in motion to dismiss. 16, explaining claims and defences in retaliatory lawsuit in context of result of Ms. Lively's motion to dismiss. 16, describing complained of offence of retaliatory conduct. We'll have another look at it in a minute. I'm trying not to go too long if I can help it for you. In any event, this is a footnote, in any event, many of the spokesperson's statements were made in direct response to publicity harmful to Ms. Lively, initiated by Mr. Freedman. See Exhibit A, statement number 7, responding to statement that Ms. Lively's deposition should be held at Madison Square Garden with tickets sold to the public. 9, responding to media circus created by statements regarding the withdrawal of subpoena to Ms. Swift for documents. So these statements do not assert that Mr. Baldoni will fail to show up for trial. So what have I said here? I think he's had bigger worries foisted on him than this accusation. I think that was the last thing that Justin Baldoni would have been worrying about, people saying him failing to show up for trial. Give false testimony or try to bully others. He's already been accused of bullying multiple times, especially Isabella. Instead, every reference Mr. Freedman has identified is a description of a claim or argument made in court filings, which Rule 3.6 deems presumptively permissible as opposed to efforts to assassinate the credibility or character of an opposing party or witness, which Rule 3.6 deems presumptively impermissible. Mr. Freedman also has not made any showing beyond his own conclusory judgment, and they've made plenty of conclusory judgments, as to how his over-the-line statements were justified by anything Ms. Lively's counsel said in the press. See opposition at 21. Mr. Freedman's bold assertion that his statements were absolved by the prejudice created by the incessant press releases and interviews published by Ms. Lively and her counsel fails to demonstrate what publicity rendered any of his specific statements necessary, or that they were properly limited to such information as is necessary to mitigate the recent adverse publicity. And she can go on Seth Meyers and say that, you know, fear is by design and all of that. It's to keep us silent. And I'm just so grateful that I can speak up on behalf of women and girls and all of that. What was that implying? What was that suggesting? You know, that she wasn't allowed to speak up, you know, and say what really happened, that there's so much more that we don't know, you know, that we're not aware of. Mr. Freedman's assertion that certain of his statements regarding Ms. Lively can be categorised as any of the presumptively permissible subjects enumerated in 3.6c is conclusory and cannot be squared with the text of the rule, opposition at 21. The statements that he defends as discussing scheduling are in fact statements to convince the public that Ms. Lively will attempt to avoid her deposition because she is afraid of the truth. See Freedman's statement numbers 1 We'll see if they contrive to avoid a deposition, is what he said. And she did avoid a deposition several times. And when they finally did, she released a second amended complaint the night before the deposition. So we're going to see if she's going to appear at that deposition or not. The same is true for Mr. Freedman's taunt that Ms. Lively should sit for a public deposition at Madison Square Garden and that he would sell tickets or stream it, which might constitute appropriate scheduling for a boxing promoter, but is unacceptable for a licensed attorney discussing civil litigation. And I think everybody kind of understands that that statement was hyperbole, not meant to anything, was actually drawing attention back to the fact that we should be focusing on DV survivors and how we support them. And that was the joke, wasn't it? Not so much a joke, but saying that, sell tickets and give the proceeds. Because it was basically saying, if she's so confident, if she's nothing to hide, then she should be able to just turn up for a deposition tomorrow, knowing what has absolutely happened to her and be happy to talk about it. You know what I mean? But the fact of is that she was stalling, because the whole case is the defamation thing. It's not the SH thing at all. The whole case is this untraceable smear campaign. The whole case is a continuing to try and find evidence where there isn't any. That's the case. Similarly, the statements Mr. Freedman describes as concerning the amended complaint, opposition at 22, specifically that documents do not lie, people do, Freedman's statement number 3, and that Miss Lively is a Hollywood elite who does not need discovery to find out who smeared her, just a mirror will do. So what I said here to my little self was, as many have said before, this is pure sound advice to anyone who gets themselves into this kind of situation in life. Even if you think you have grounds for your grievance, you should always look in the mirror and examine your own actions first. That's my opinion. So Freedman's statement number 5-6. Do not concern any claims or allegations in the amended complaint, but rather characterize Ms. Lively as a liar and a person of bad character who invited press attacks, absolving, of course, the Wayfarer defendants of their smear campaign against her. Mr. Freedman's argument that his statement number 5 is permissible as a matter of public record, that Ms. Lively faced media backlash, ignores that the source of this backlash is at issue in the currently pending litigation. So what was my comment here? The public are content, they know, this is me, the public are content, they know the source of the backlash, and they aren't worried about a PR plan or strategy that was never invoked. The public understand the necessity for a defensive plan to be in place to be used, if necessary, in order to protect someone from an aggressor. That's my feeling on it anyway, just my feeling, might be yours. Regardless, none of these statements are without elaboration as required by NY Rule 3.6c. So the court should sanction Mr. Freedman pursuant to Rule 16F and its inherent power. Mr. Freedman's failure to obey the court's clear and unambiguous pre-trial order incorporating NY Rule 3.6 violates Federal Rule 16F and is sufficient grounds for the court to impose whichever sanction it feels is appropriate under the circumstances. And there's case law that was quoted there. New York law is clear that when, as here, violations of Federal Rule 16F are not substantially justified, the court must order the wrongdoer to pay the reasonable expenses, including attorney's fees, incurred because of the non-compliance, more case law stated there. And this is where they're always saying how generous Ms. Lively is in terms of what she's asking for. You know, she's never overstepping, is always implied. And Ms. Lively seeks only a public admonishment and an award of costs and fees. I mean, that's hardly anything at all, is it? And, you know, she's asking for so very little. She's so benevolent. If the court decides to impose sanctions, Mr. Freedman concedes that those are proper sanctions. Indeed, he makes no objection to these sanctions, instead entreating the court to reject the request to revoke Mr. Freedman's pro hac vice admission, see opposition at 22, remarking that no punishment for a perceived slight would be too draconian for Ms. Lively. It is telling that Mr. Freedman fixates on this purportedly draconian sanction because Ms. Lively did not request that relief at this time and only reserved her rights to seek it if Mr. Freedman continues to refuse to follow the rules of this court. everyone is forever continuing to do stuff, is what I noted to myself, to Blake Lively in her mind. She's always projecting into the future that there's a problem. And that is her problem, Blake. That's one of the major problems. She's projecting into the future that these attacks are going to continue. She's inventing stuff, in other words. So Mr. Freedman continues to refuse to follow the rules of this court, motion at 17. Ms. Lively reserves all rights to seek appropriate remedial instructions prior to trial, as well as to seek additional sanctions. What have I said here? Has she ever ceased asking or expecting sanctions? In the event Mr. Freedman continues to violate the NY Rule 3.6 order, including but not limited to revocation of Mr. Freedman's pro hac vice admission. So you probably know this by now. You don't need me telling you, but it's his permission to practice in California in regards to this case, to represent her in effect, because it's out of his area. They need this pro hac vice whenever they go and practice law in somewhere that's not where they're registered or licensed or whatever it is, I guess the proper terminology is. So finally, the court may also sanction Mr. Freedman under its inherent power in tandem with or in addition to any sanctions imposed under Rule 16F in light of Mr. Freedman's willful disobedience of the court's Rule 3.6 order, motion at 18, quoting Rice v. NBC Universal Media. In addition to the reasons set forth in Ms. Lively's opening brief, Mr. Freedman's opposition further demonstrates his willful disobedience. He purported to welcome this court's entry of its Rule 3.6 order. He acknowledges that his statements regarding a party's credibility, character, or reputation ordinarily, materially prejudicial to the proceedings, and yet he nevertheless admittedly engaged in that conduct a minimum of 10 times in half as many months. It's interesting that, isn't it? In that conduct a minimum of 10 times, so they've highlighted these 10 times. But it's like, that kind of indicates to me that they've not been keeping a very good track of it, because why wouldn't you bring up all of them if there were more? If it's such a problem, somebody is not doing their due diligence back there, because it shouldn't be this vague terminology of a minimum of 10 times. If you're telling the court that it's a problem, you should be on this like white on rice, as they say in America, shouldn't you? What's my comment here? Did I put one, or is this a mistake? There doesn't seem to be anything there. Anyway, Mr. Freedman's actions and admissions illustrate his bad faith. Therefore, the court should impose sanctions under its inherent power. And there's more case law citing there where $20,000 sanction for bad faith conduct in that Rice X versus NBC Universal Media. For the reasons stated above, this court should impose sanctions against Mr. Freedman and set a briefing schedule for the calculation of any award as appropriate. So that's that. So let me just, that's the chart basically. So actually, can I make that bigger for you? I am not an expert on doing these kinds of things. I don't actually mess about with PDFs that much, to be fair. Let's see if I can bring it bigger. So these were Blake's side statements and their interpretation of it that they referred to throughout the documents. But I mean, I think it's hard to dismiss that it's not a problem when you're repeating the accusations of SH and retaliation and things like this. Allegations of this type of misconduct is to blame the victim. The amount of, as I said before, the amount of times they accused him of Darvo. This another classic tactic is to reverse the victim and offender. So it's reiterating this idea that he can't defend himself. And that's a real problem to me, because how is that not prejudicial when he can't have a voice, when content creators can't have a voice either? It is problematic. So I think there is an argument, in my opinion, to say that Bryan Freedman has had to do a lot of these things that he's doing in order to just balance some of the things, or to at least raise a question in people's mind that there may be a different perspective on it. Lively spokesperson is saying, what is Bryan Freedman hiding? After promising to release all the receipts, Freedman ran into court to keep secret the phone records of who these people were calling during the retaliatory campaign. That was when she wanted everybody's phone records of everything, like across the board, like you had no privacy. And their argument here is there's no mention of Mr. Baldoni or any Wayfarer defendant. Well, what's this? Information is in public record. Well, I think you could argue that Bryan's information is in public record because we're all stating it anyway. He's reiterating what we all think in tiny little sound bites, in effect, isn't he, really? So anyway, you might want to look at this in your own time on the docket. It is, what number is it? So it's 702-1. So this is the exhibit A, the attachment of all the times that Freedman referenced in his objection to being sanctioned, shall we call it. So I'm just trying to say there's one worth reading here. I'm just going to pause it. No, I won't pause it because I might lose you. I'm not that technically savvy. So Ms. Lively's agent stated that Mr. Baldoni, Sarowitz and team continued to turn a case of SH and retaliation into entertainment for the tabloids, going as far as suggesting that they sell tickets to a concert venue. It's trivialized. These people are trivializing what Bryan's done and elevating this idea of Bryan's side trivializing what is going on in terms of SH and retaliation. Look here. We are pleased that Justin Baldoni and the Wayfarer parties have withdrawn their harassing subpoenas to Taylor Swift. Is that not reiterating their argument of their side are bullies and harassers and predators and the rest of it? And that so enrages me that Lively's side are using Taylor Swift, a woman who has been an inspiration for tens of millions across the globe and has been at the center of this case since day one, as if they were doing that, as if they were responsible for her being there. So that's it, basically. I'm not going to bang on about this. Like I say, you can go and look at this on the docket for yourself if you like. It's nothing that we haven't covered before, but it'd be interesting for me to know your feelings on it all. That's, I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. So that is the news that dropped into my email inbox today. So you tell me your feelings on it. Which way do you think it will go? Do you think Freedman will be sanctioned? I mean, we had that little ray of light the other day when Blake got a rap on her knuckles, but we're still yet to see whether she does get to have that extended information up to the present, or at least up to February or whatever random arbitrary day it was. But yeah, that's my thoughts and feelings to today. And like I say, you let me know if you would quite like me to drop one of my novels onto my YouTube docket. I make a playlist so you can listen to me read one of my books. It's a romantic novel, and I think it would make as equally a good movie as one of Colleen's. What's funny, actually, people say that lots of Mint Mobile commercials are dropping into their YouTube adverts. I don't get any because obviously being based in the UK, it would be pointless because Mint isn't available over here. But now all of a sudden in my YouTube homepage or whatever feed, it's all like scenes from It Ends With Us, because there must be like, I guess it takes a while before you can have big chunks of a film readily available. I don't know how these things work, but now all of my YouTube thing is full of scenes taken from It Ends With Us. And I think I've watched a couple of them, and I think as a movie I'd probably be often, like when I watch movies, I have to be working at the same time. They don't hold my attention so much that I think, I need to be doing something useful at the same time as watching this. It's few and far between movies that I sit and do nothing while I'm watching them. And I think I have a feeling It Ends With Us, I'd probably be chipping away doing work at the same time. But I also felt it was a real shame, It was a real shame that she didn't just behave herself, suck it up, get on with her life, because it looks a pretty decent movie, and pretty, people did a good job, for the most part. I think she's the one that doesn't gel, if I'm totally honest. But everybody else that, seemed to be involved, it looked like it was a relatively good movie, and it could have had the right message and all of the rest of it. But so it's a shame. And that's kind of, going back to talking about Andy and Perez at the beginning, and how you can change people's perspective on something and change the narrative around yourself at any point in time. And still now, if she chose to, she could change the narrative about herself. But she's determined that this is the pathway. And I don't think she'll ever be enlightened as to it being any different. And I was also thinking, I bet this is all over her children. I was thinking, I bet Justin Baldoni's children have very little knowledge of this, of what's going on. But I feel like Blake Lively's children will very much know what's going on. I could almost see like her pointing to things and saying, "Oh, look what I did! I'm sticking up for myself, and they're not going to get away with this, or blah blah blah. And this is how I want you to be one day. You have to say your piece and stand by your convictions, or whatever it is." I just thought it'd be interesting to be a fly on the wall of both families and see what's going on in the Lively camp versus, what children are being exposed to in all of this. I mean, that would have been a big factor in my life if I'd have been embroiled in something like this, is how much is this going to impact my children? How much are my children having to go off to school and have spouted in the face and things like that? The things that are being said about me in public that my children are going to have to deal with. It would be interesting to know what was happening in both families, wouldn't it, really? Anyway, please do hit that like and subscribe and share if you're enjoying this content. Drop me a comment, let me know. I'll get back to you as much as possible as I can. I really appreciate you all. And as I say, let me know if you fancy me dropping my romantic fiction with a very British sense of humour onto my YouTube docket. I think we should all start calling our YouTube channels our own personal dockets. All right, I will see you later, and thank you for watching to the end.